What kind of marriage do you have? What kind of marriage do you want? I'm Dr. Carol, and thank you for joining me in this episode. If you have said I do, you wanted something that was good. But so many of the married people that I talk with, their marriage doesn't seem like it's good. Maybe they're surviving, but it's certainly not life-giving. Well, I have a seasoned, wise guest to talk about these issues with me here today. Dr. Steve Call is a psychologist who specializes in working with married couples. He has been part of the Allender School of Psychology and Theology, also has the Reconnect Institute. Dr. Steve Call and Dr. Dan Allender have written a book that it's wonderful. I've read it. I think you need to read it. Deep-Rooted Marriage, Cultivating Intimacy, Healing, and Delight. Do you have delight in your marriage? Well, we're going to talk about some of those dynamics. I think you will find this enlightening and encouraging, hopeful. Watch this. Dr. Steve Call, I'll call you Steve, but just to welcome you.
Absolutely.
It's really great to have this conversation with you about some stuff that I get asked about a lot. I know you get asked about a lot. You know, marriage, connection, intimacy, all of that. And maybe for people who haven't been aware of you, just a word or two about how you came to, where you are now and your experience in helping marriages just get out of the gutter and into goodness.
Well, thank you for the invitation, and thank you for the opportunity to have a conversation with you, and grateful. I work as a clinical psychologist, and my specialty is working with married couples. I've been doing that the last probably 25 years. I also teach at a graduate school called the Seattle School of Theology and Psychology, and with an emphasis on working with graduate students that may be interested in working with couples and individuals. And I love my work. It's deeply, deeply impactful for me personally. And my marriage to my wife, Lisa. And so, it is a privilege to walk alongside couples, and yet there is such heartache
Yes.
for many couples that are struggling in their marriage. And so part of the hope in our book that Dan Allender and I wrote, The Deep-Rooted Marriage, was really to bring hope to couples that may not have a sense of what hope looks like, sounds like, feels like, what's on the other side, of what they might be struggling with. And so that has been a real joy to write with him, and was a wonderful experience.
Yeah. Well, I've had Dr. Dan Allender on the podcast in the
Hmm.
past some time ago, and
Yes.
just that was thrilling. And now that you two have done this work together, I know the two of you, along with your wives, have been doing marriage events, conferences,
Mhm.
intensives, and whatever for some time. Your experience is deep. As I was privileged to read A Deep-Rooted Marriage, one of the first things that stood out to me was the story aspect of this. Nobody gets
Yeah.
married saying, I want to be miserable. Everybody wants the happily ever after. But too
Mhm.
often there's a lot of stuff that happens. Can you just put
Mhm.
that in context?
Sure. I love the reframe and the remembering of story. I think that for many couples, that's not really part of how they entered into marriage, is the awareness of what we bring from our past and how it plays a part in the present. And that is, to me, such a significant part of what we want to highlight throughout our writing, but also in our marriage work, our events, our conferences, is how our story plays a part in what we might be encountering and remembering and experiencing in our marriage. And I think for many individuals, that's not really part of what they signed up for. Wait, you're inviting me to be aware that the past is part of the present? Yeah, absolutely. Oh, you said I do to that. That's part of what we said I do to, is the remembering of what was, because it plays itself out. And I think
Mm.
for many couples, that's often where we start, but where we linger for a prolonged period of time, is we want to help couples be aware of what's happening now, how it might be connected to particular experiences and relational dynamics in their past story. That's a really significant part of what we hope to bring.
Yeah. As you tell vignettes and stories in the book, something
Mhm.
that comes to mind is when if I'm married, my husband has
Yes.
passed away, but if I'm
Right.
married, and I get triggered, it's just there's something going on right now. It's
Hmm.
real.
It
The
is.
present moment is real, but then the volume of my response, it brings in, it can often just truckloads of stuff from the past. It's
Yeah.
kind of this and that.
Yes. Yes. It is both. And I think that's part of what, for many of us, we're not often aware of, that it's both the present and the past. And yes, truckload. I really like that image, that we carry a lot in the present that's connected to past, but still connected, to what's happening in the moment. And I think for many couples, and for Lisa and I, that's so true. She was, for example, she was gone this last weekend, was visiting some friends, and was very busy and we're having a wonderful time with her friends. And for some reason, didn't really check in or call for a day or two. And I got what we call triggered. I had a reaction like, wait a minute, what's am I not being remembered? Am I not important? And for me, that's a really important part of my story, is that I was often not remembered or not a priority or not thought about. And so in the moment, I'm having a reaction that's connected, yes, to the present, but also to the past. And I think that's the awareness that we hope for readers and listeners to become more aware of, is how is that present moment connected to something in the past, but still very connected to the present.
Yeah. As you and your wife Lisa, and in the work
Hmm.
you do with couples, have processed some of this, what would you say to somebody who's married and feeling
Hmm.
always triggered and, oh, my spouse always does this or never does this?
Mm.
What's the process to kind of understand some of this story bit and what's being pulled in from the past?
Yeah, I love that question. And we have a sort of a playfulness with the couples that we work with around those words, always and never. The always and never are such a setup, that they set us up for expectation and failure. And I think for many couples, the way we use the assumptions of how something's going to go in the present is again connected to the past. And so I think, I mean, literally, it's our hope and invitation for couples is this sense of open-handedness, is what can I become maybe a little bit more aware of with regard to my spouse's story that is being triggered, activated, playing a part in what's happening between the two of us. So it's not just about mine, it's also about Lisa's story, it's about our partner's story. And I think that's the critical piece for many couples that often there's not maybe space for or invitation for. That we want to encourage ourselves to be aware of, how is my partner's story getting activated, remembered, reenacted in this very moment.
Yeah. One of the things that hearing those words might make somebody feel is, oh, this is such an enormous mountain to climb. But the whole
Mm.
flavor of what you write in Deep Rooted Marriage, and you already alluded to it, is hope.
Yes.
There is a way to make this good, and you come with the premise that the challenges in working through these dynamics are actually part of what God intended marriage to be, to bring us goodness, that it's not
Mm.
just survival.
Mm.
What can that healing, or whatever the connection, whatever words are appropriate, what can that look like as a result of this process?
Well, that's a, again, really beautiful invitation, because one of the ways we start many of our conferences and intensives is we start with the paradigm of attachment. And we talk about our attachment with our caregiver, but we also talk about our relational attachment with God. And part of the invitation that we offer is can we look at attachment as the invitation for me, for us to be the image of God on behalf of our spouse. And that to me is part of the Genesis narrative that is often overlooked, is that we are designed for relationship, but we are also made in his image. And part of our invitation, again, I obviously I love that word invitation, because that's our prompt for so many of the couples we work with, is would I dare to believe that I can be, or am invited to be, the image of God on behalf of my spouse. And
Yes.
that sets us up for what lies on the other side with regard to hope, is that if I can embrace and choose to embrace that as the privilege of what marriage is meant to offer, I think goodness comes as a response to that.
Mm. I love the attachment paradigm. I found
Mhm.
that so helpful in my own understanding of myself and the people
Mhm.
that I talk with. Along with that, the idea of rupture and repair. And I know we could talk for hours about some of those things, but would you just put the rupture and repair piece in context here with marriage and attachment and getting triggered in our story?
Sure. Well, rupture and repair really refers to the way in which we engage or navigate conflict primarily. When something triggers us, I get bothered, irritated, frustrated, angry.
Yeah.
How I respond to my partner, how I respond to my spouse. Often, again, some of that activation we use to protect ourselves. That's part of the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses that we write about, that we talk about.
Yeah.
We have relational responses that protect us. And sometimes we use those not always with the intent to harm, but it can come across as hurt with our partner. And that's the rupture. Rupture really is like the image of tear.
Yes.
It's a division. And often what we want to highlight is it's not so much about the repair, it's actually how we recover, how we turn toward, how we repair.
Okay.
That's the key part of any tension, any conflict. uh, if we avoid conflict for good reason at times, it doesn't give us the opportunity for repair. And so a lot of our work, a lot of our again prompts are around how we might engage the repair process, which is often for many of us, it wasn't modeled, it wasn't part of our
Yes.
story. It
Yes.
wasn't when my parents had conflict, they just created distance. They didn't engage. I didn't know what good, kind repair looked like. So rupture and repair really is around how we turn toward the other, how we return with kindness, with goodness, how we lay down our defense. I think that's part of, again, for me, I mean, we've been married 38 years and it's still a struggle. It's still a struggle that when we have conflict, I want to run, I want to hide. I don't want to engage with Lisa. And yet that to me is where the intimacy comes, is we've reframed conflict as a form of intimacy.
Wow.
What if conflict can actually be a form of intimacy? If we stay connected to intimacy as the root meaning of to make known, we make ourselves known. And that has been, I think, a really helpful shift in the paradigm for so many couples.
Hmm. I can imagine somebody hearing us and thinking,
Hmm.
you know, intimacy, well, that's intercourse. What are you
Mm.
talking about with conflict
Mm.
and intimacy and this
Yeah.
being seen? Yeah.
Uh, Intimacy at its root. And to me, it's at its root is really to be seen, to be known, to make known, as you just referenced. And uh, we are very, very intentional around emotional intimacy as the premise, as the way we engage one another emotionally that leads obviously to sexual intimacy.
Sure.
And part of the emotional intimacy that gets missed and lost is how we turn toward one another in that repair process. Often we'll say something like, "Hey, what's the goal of conflict? What do you think? What do you imagine?" When you pause in that, what's your mission statement? What's your vision statement? And for many of us, we might say to win. We might say to convince the other that I'm right. And we're actually about, oh my gosh, what if it's really about seeking to understand? What if that's the goal? What if that's what drives us? That when I understand Lisa, there's an intimacy that's cultivated. When I
Yes.
understand her story, when I understand, and vice versa, when she understands a part of what's revealed in what I might be sharing or what I might be speaking to, that to me is a true intimacy.
Mm, mm. I'm glad you mentioned a minute ago, Steve, that this is something, even after 38 years of marriage, that you have to be intentional about, that takes effort and isn't necessarily easy for
Mm.
somebody who has never learned to do that. Can you put some words for a minute about how do you turn toward your spouse, especially when you aren't feeling like it at all?
Yeah. One of the ways that we've found, and I think for Lisa and I, but also for other couples to be really helpful, is can we have the courage in moments of disruption, moments of tension? Can we actually have the courage to ask the question out loud of ourselves, what just happened? Or what's happening? When we can pause and actually invite ourselves to be aware of what's happening in my body, what's that connected to, what's happening for you. Oh, I think goodness really can come from that intentionality. of being able to say, what's going on? What's going on for me? One of the pillars of the work we do really is awareness. And
Mhm.
awareness is driven by that intentionality of, hey, what just happened? What's happening for me? Can I pause and reflect and be aware? And often we don't have words, and that's okay. Often we don't have words. I really want to emphasize that. I often don't know why I'm behaving the way I do, often why I'm feeling what I'm feeling. But when there's curiosity, either from myself or from our partner, that is a really beautiful, I think, portrait of what is meant to be in the design of marriage, is that sort of curiosity of, hey, what's going on for me? Hey, what's going on for you? And I know that's difficult to ask and invite when I'm bothered, when we're irritated, when we're frustrated, when we're angry. But I do think that is one of the most helpful ways that we can engage moments like that.
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned Genesis that I reflect on in Genesis is God intended intimacy. Adam and Eve experienced that in the Genesis story. And then the
Mhm,
first thing they do when evil enters is hide.
mhm.
They just cover themselves, hide in the bushes from
Yeah,
themselves, from each other, from God.
yeah.
And the whole paradigm of marriage as God intended it
Mhm,
is coming out from hiding.
mhm.
But that's not just sex. Um,
Yeah.
in this quarter, we at Dr. Carroll Ministries are focusing a lot on intimacy and sex. They're related. God intended them to be related in marriage, but they are not the same.
Mhm.
Would you just kind of explicitly put some words to that, how we hide and just
Yeah.
having intercourse doesn't fix the hiding, how
Mhm,
emotional intimacy, spiritual intimacy plays into
mhm.
this and what the goodness was intended to be?
Yeah, I love your reference to the Genesis story of hiding, and hiding is often our response to the
Yes,
shame that we feel.
yes,
And that, and I know that's true for me. When I feel shame, I want to run, I want to hide, I want to go away. Shame really is the fear of exposure, the fear of being seen. And so part of the illusion of hiding is that it's a form of protection, and yet it keeps us
yes,
from being seen from by the one that longs to know us and to see us and literally be in our presence. And so hiding is a form of protection, but it's the illusion of it. And I think for Lisa and I, that has been a really significant part of our journey, is when one hides, what's the invitation from the other? One of the most beautiful, I think, scripture in all of scripture is the verse when in Genesis where Adam and Eve are in hiding, just like you referenced. And God says the question, He says, where are you? And that question is not one of judgment. It really
yes,
is, although that's often how we can hear it, but it's our invitation again from each of us, I think, for each of us to what pursuit, good, kind pursuit looks like. Where are you? Where did you go? And so intimacy is a form of pursuit, it's a form of engagement, sometimes sexually, sometimes emotionally, yes, sometimes spiritually. And so I think for many of us, we've lost the art of pursuit. And I think that's the invitation maybe that we're keep coming back to, is what does good, kind pursuit look like? When our partner, when our spouse is turned away, whether they're consumed by shame or something else, where are you? Where did you go? Is that offered out of invitation? Is that a bid? Is it offered out of kindness, or is it offered out of judgment? And I think for many of us, we often hear that question, where are you, out of judgment? And we're saying, I think that is really driven by a desire to be known, a
yes.
desire to know, which again, at its root, that's how we define intimacy.
Mm. You've referenced shame more than once, and I'm really glad as a
Yeah.
part of hiding, but in all this pursuit of intimacy. Um, there's been a lot of talk about shame in certain circles recently, which I think is very good. But in the context we're talking about it right now, for
Mhm.
somebody who's married and is feeling a lot of shame,
Yeah.
um, maybe a few words to that person about what it can look like to walk out of the shame, or how do you deal with that and
Mm.
pursue intimacy anyway? Because that can feel
Oh,
terrifying.
oh, it can feel terrifying. I mean, because at a core, again, shame is this fear of exposure, but it's also the terror of judgment.
Hmm.
And part of what I think happens for many of us when we feel shame is we want to stay in secrecy. We want to stay in silence. We want to keep it to ourselves. And the bind with shame is that it grows exponentially in secrecy.
Yes.
It just continues to fester, if you will. And so we hope and invite listeners, but also couples that we work with, that when we begin to tell the story, when we begin to share or to put words to what shame is attempting or wanting to communicate to me, what am I feeling when I feel shame? What am I saying to me? I love the word script. We write a lot about that, talk a lot about what we call shame scripts. And those
Yes.
are just words that we say to ourselves, maybe in silence or secrecy, about myself. For me, when I feel shame, I want to go to judgment. I just want to say, man, what a loser. What's wrong with me? It has this hint. Kurt Thompson writes about shame, wonderful writer, author, speaker. And that's his reframe of shame is it's one of judgment.
Mhm.
And so when we begin to share the story of shame, it tends to loosen the grip of shame. And that's counterintuitive because our fear is that it will be judged, that it will be somehow mocked, teased, dismissed, ignored. And
Yep.
it is one of the most beautiful moments when couples, when an individual speaks or is invited to share the words of what are you saying to you about you? What is shame trying to communicate? What is
Mm.
it trying to say to you? We get to help rewrite the script for our
Yes.
partner, for our spouse. And that's, again, the privilege, I think, of what it is meant to be.
Mm. Beautiful, beautiful.
Mm,
I find my heart feeling warm as you
mm,
describe that. Coming out of the shame and actually healing those places
mm,
through the tough stuff of
mm.
working through these things in marriage. Um, I want to bring up a couple scenarios that I hear from people. One was
Sure.
a wife who reached out to me, frankly, just this morning. This is very
Okay.
current, but
Great.
this kind of thing happens all the time, and I know it does
Yeah.
for you too. This particular situation, husband and wife have been married for between 8 and 10 years. They have two children, and she is frustrated to no end that he doesn't pay her any attention, using some of her words, doesn't pay her any attention. He's not romantic. He doesn't listen to her. He doesn't want to have any conversations. She keeps telling him what she wants, and he just turns a blind eye. And finally, he erupts and says, I don't want a mom. I want a wife.
Mm.
A brief scenario, but I'm sure in those few words, you can just imagine the picture. What would you say to a couple in that kind of situation?
Well, first of all, what you're highlighting and what she's shared with you, I think is fairly common. And
Yes.
what she's naming and revealing is the core root of what we address in the writing is when it is the notion and the experience of loneliness. When we feel lonely, it is unbearable. And
Yes.
part of our work, part of our remembering is that that is part of what is for so many couples at the root of their struggle or their disconnection is the felt sense of loneliness. How
Mm.
one communicates it, how one reveals it can look very different between two spouses, two partners. So I think what you're naming on her behalf is one of I feel lonely. I feel lonely in my marriage, which is not uncommon. It's I think for many of us, I felt lonely at times. Lisa has felt lonely at times. How we respond to the loneliness is part of again what we want and hope for someone like that. I have found no greater what I'll call change agent other than being able to put words to how we're impacted by the other's fill in the blank behavior, choice, lack of engagement. It sounds something like when we are disconnected, or when we aren't having conversation, or when we're not going for a walk. This is what it feels like for me. Again, the open handedness, the posture of how we name impact, how we put words to how we're impacted. I, I, I think for so many couples, it's often spoken in blame. It's often revealed in accusation. When Lisa says something like, when we didn't go on our walk yesterday, I felt I felt unimportant to you, or I felt like I didn't matter. And that is what we're hoping to tap into is empathy,
Yes.
is can I be aware of the impact? And so for a couple, for a woman like that, I think the hope is that when we reveal how we're impacted by the other's choice, does that tap into something of empathy, of desire,
Right.
of hope. Uh, Rarely does it go well when I say to Lisa something out of accusation or blame. It tends to go much better, or has the possibility of that, when I reveal how I'm impacted.
Yeah.
Can I share with you? It sounds something like, hey, can I share this with you? I've been thinking about this. Again, it's a collaborative conversation. It's not one of accusation. It's not one of judgment.
Yeah. I love that. The invitation bit, you come back to that repeatedly. I
I do.
love that invitation language.
Mhm.
There is a dynamic that I certainly have heard from people from time to time, and I'm sure you have too, where a spouse, man or woman, will be making this invitation and will be making every effort to have an open heart and understand, and their spouse is closed or retort back in ways that at least their perception is enjoys causing them pain. We live in a
Mhm.
sinful world, and sin is language that can stir up all kinds of things that may or may not be the best language right here. But when a partner seems to enjoy my pain, can
Mhm.
you just comment on where that would fit in this paradigm?
Mhm. Yeah, I think that also can be a common experience, is how come he or she doesn't
Yeah,
respond?
yeah,
Do I not matter? Am I not important? I think again that's where shame can be so consuming.
yeah.
For many couples that we see and work with and talk with, the resistance to engage or the resistance to respond is often connected to fear, that I don't know how to be what you need me to be.
Yes.
So the what John Gottman, his wife, calls stonewalling is, I think, again, part of what you're referencing, is when I choose to not engage. It's often connected to fear, and I really want to highlight that it's not so much I don't want to. It's more often about I don't know how to. And so,
Okay.
how we can put words or be able to maybe just kindle some of the awareness of his or her mm, lack of response at times is more connected to the fear of I don't know how. And for many men in particular, not knowing how to do something, it really is this profound sense of futility.
Yes.
And part of what futility does is it shuts us down, is
Mhm.
we withdraw, we don't engage. So I it it is an unkind experience when one chooses not to respond well. And again, the paradigm that you just referenced, that's a sad reality for many. But part of it is it's also connected to this inability. I just don't know how to.
Yes.
And that, to me, for many couples, has been again something that kindles some form of hope. Is desire is so quiet and it's so silent, but if we can tap into the desire for something of connection rather than the convincing of I don't have what it takes. I don't know how to be what you need.
Yeah. Something I will say more often to wives, although sometimes husbands are helped by this too, that
Mhm.
there are some husbands who, when they feel a desire to connect, they will make a bid for sex because all the hormones of sex, they can feel connected in that way, in a
Sure.
way that they rarely do otherwise. And so I will sometimes help a wife to understand he is wanting to connect. Of course, there can be
Mhm.
bad behavior on both sides. But
Right.
would you talk for a minute about how this intimacy and desire and connection can play out a bit in the bedroom, and sexual desire and the intimacy that sex is designed to fuel?
Mhm. Yeah. Part of I think what we have come across, I think, for decades and more recently, is we're wanting to help couples be aware that desire can be communicated in different ways. That the desire for sex is the desire for connection. The desire for or emotional intimacy is the desire for connection. And sometimes, yes, we are built and wired differently. And sometimes that way we express desire looks different. How are we kind to difference? That's a prompt that I hope couples keep coming back to, is that my wife's expression of desire is different than the way I will express my desire. How are we kind to that desire without judgment? And so part of how we navigate intimacy, part of how we navigate conflict is how are we honoring the difference? How do we bless difference? How are we kind to difference? So the manifestation of bids, which is I think what you're referencing, how he and how she reveal desire is different. How are we kind to that without saying one is better, one is worse? And for many couples, I think that's the struggle. Is so many of the couples that we work with, the struggle is around the difficulty in navigating difference, whatever difference is, sexually, emotionally, physically, spiritually. And so I think anything that we refer to in the realm of sexuality and pursuit and desire is often it's communicated and revealed in a way of difference. It's not the same. And yet, how are we kind to the difference?
Mm. And of course, a story brings all, plays
Mm,
into all of that all the time. Maybe the last major question I want you to comment on, you've referenced be kind, you've referenced honoring, you've mentioned seeking to bless.
mm,
For some people who feel pain in their marriage, that can be hard. Would you
mm,
talk about what that looks like, and then how somebody's heart who might be finding that difficult can step into making the choice to bless, even if their own heart is
mm,
not yet completely full?
mm. The reason chose the title "The Deep Rooted Marriage" is because we spend a lot of time talking about soil and amendments to the soil. That how we uproot maybe what isn't flourishing, what isn't maybe being tended to well. And so part of what I think for many of us is we have stored maybe in our soil of relational dynamics, maybe some form of resentment, some form of bitterness, some form of judgment. And so I know my hardened heart is often connected to what I have not named, what I have not revealed, what I have not spoken, what I have not honored. It has become what we could just name as hardened soil. And so part of the what we want to keep coming back to is what has been unattended to,
Yes.
what hasn't been nurtured. What might that look like? Maybe that's working with a life coach or a story coach or a therapist. Maybe that's working with somebody, coming along somebody that can be kind to my story, that can help unearth again some of what has not been unearthed, what has not been seen, what has not been revealed. I love that imagery. We love that imagery because it feels like there's literally something we can nurture and bring to life in those moments.
Mm, beautiful. I feel like there's so much more that could be said, but would you just invite people to connect with you and the book and whatever you might want to uh, invite them for a moment?
Oh, sure. Well, we much of our work and resources can be found on our website. It's called the reconnectinstitute.com. The Deep Rooted Marriage and the Companion Guide is available in all media and outlets. We offer what we call marriage story intensives, which are 3-day intensives, both with Lisa and I, and then Dan Allender and his wife Becky for 8 couples that we do 3 times a year. That we love those. We have found those to be really beautiful, life-giving experiences for couples. So those are I think, the primary resources
Yeah.
that I would invite listeners into.
Mm. Well, we will make sure that we share links when we share
Mm,
this podcast.
good.
I have been encouraged and blessed, Steve. Thank you so much, and
Of
blessings
course.
on your work. I want to tell you, just a couple days ago, I referred a friend of mine and her husband to check out your resources, and so
Oh,
I
wonderful.
frankly, I hope they
Mm.
take advantage of it and maybe one of your story weekends. So
Oh, thank
many
you.
blessings to you.
Thank you. It's been a privilege and I've so enjoyed our conversation. Thanks.
If the idea of intimacy, connection, delight is intriguing and stirs up desire in you, check out and connect with some of the resources that Dr. Steve Call and those who work with him have available. Get the book, Deep Rooted Marriage. You'll find that link under this video. Connect with the Reconnect Institute. You'll also see that link under this video. and some social media stuff as well. If I were you and I were in a really troubled marriage where there was no good connection and we just kept hurting each other, I'd seriously consider going to one of their marriage story intensives that Dr. Call mentioned. I think that would be delightful. I also want to let you know about a new resource we have at Dr. Carroll Ministries that we've just released this month. Our brand new online Sexpectations digital course experience. This course, the Sexpectations course, is not about sex and marriage. It is about your own story. Remember, Steve talked many times about understanding our own story and also your spouse's story if you're married. But when it comes to sex and intimacy and relationships, contending with your own story can feel daunting, but it's possible. This online digital course experience is one that you can do in your own home, at your own pace. Take the time that you need to let your heart address your story through this process with honesty and compassion. There's worksheets, there's videos, there's guided reflections that actually help you experience Jesus being in the middle of your story. You'll see stories of other individuals who have walked through their challenges, all kinds of different sexual stuff. Yoursexpectations.com, and then click on the online course button. You'll also find that link under this video. And if you are still watching this and hungry for intimacy, I think this is a great way to deal with your stuff so you can be more whole in processing this with your spouse. I love to hear from you also. You can leave a comment under this video. I read every one and comment back when I have something helpful. You can also leave me a confidential message at drcarrollministries.com. The contact page there is confidential and comes directly to me. I'd love to hear you there, to see you there. I appreciate you being part of our online family here on YouTube. And until next time, may God bless you.